My community analysis and intervention was with sex trafficking in Columbus, Ohio. And sex trafficking is actually the most frequent type of human trafficking. And it's basically where victims are exploited for sexual encounters, usually for some type of monetary gain or sometimes even for food or a place to live. And as you can see through this graph on the right, the cases of human trafficking are largely represented by those in sex trafficking. So most of the time when people are referring to human trafficking, they're referring to sex trafficking. And the problem of sex trafficking is actually impacted by a lot of different factors. So you have its impact by age, gender, race, and various risk factors. So people that are impacted by sex trafficking and by human trafficking are the majority of adults. But as you can see, there's actually a large there's a large number that are also impacted by minors. So minors can be in sex trafficking about half the time that adults are. And females are largely the population impacted by sex trafficking. That doesn't mean that males are not, but it's largely females. And racial minorities are overly represented in human trafficking and in sex trafficking. And there's so many risk factors, but some of the most common are if you're being relocated, if maybe you're having some type of issue with being homeless or unstable housing. And a lot of those that are in drug trafficking or involved in substance misuse can be more likely to be impacted by sex trafficking. So, how does this impact the community of Columbus, Ohio? So, in Ohio alone, there are thousands of minors that are at risk, whether it might be because of some of those risk factors we mentioned or other risk factors, but more than 1,000 of them will actually be trafficked. So the population of Columbus has a very diverse population. It has a majority of women and a lot of people who are foreign born. And because of this, it actually makes Columbus a very at-risk city. It's just a breeding ground for a lot of this activity, and so it makes it something that's actually very popular. The state of Ohio is actually fourth in the number of human trafficking cases that have been reported. So that's only the cases that have been reported. And that actually makes Ohio very popular for these type of things to happen and at risk. And the city of Columbus, between the years of 2017 and 2019, there was actually a little over 1,800 prostitution arrests. And this is actually, prostitution can be seen as a form of sex trafficking, and the people in prostitution are definitely commonly seen as victims. And it's also been interesting in Columbus because there was a vice unit of police that were actively going after prostitutes and sex trafficking victims, but it was disbanded after a vice cop shot a prostitute. And ever since then, there's been a drastic decrease in prostitution arrests. So that means there's less women that are interacting with the law, which could actually be seen as something negative because the more people who are interacting with the law could possibly be helped or could have some type of intervention. The intervention that I came up with was something that's actually already happening in Columbus, but I thought it could be expanded. And it's the idea of using a community court and a specialized docket. And when you decide to do this, you can use a screening tool which assesses the women who are arrested and allows them to be recognized as victims. You can also hire new people to work in the courts that could connect the women, that could be social workers that could help them have the proper resources like social networking and mental health. And this whole program would act as a diversion program, which would allow those that have been victims of sex trafficking to actually be involved in other things other than incarceration. So it would allow them to connect with agencies and hopefully move on, seek employment and seek stable housing, and really work through some of the trauma that might have led to them being at risk to being involved in sex trafficking in the first place. And some of the goals and objectives, there are several, but two huge goals would to be to increase the amount of victims that receive the proper care and have that access to mental health care and have the proper access to substance misuse services, and then ultimately to decrease the amount of sex trafficking victims that are being incarcerated, because ultimately they're victims and they shouldn't be incarcerated. They should be helped, and there should be interventions with them. And this could happen through hopefully having a goal or an objective of 60% of women with social assets and supports as they are leaving the community courts. And hopefully after about 6 months, there would be a decrease in prostitution arrests, not because of the police not being active, but because the court being active and providing some new ways to intervene with this population. And I think this could definitely be easily evaluated through seeing if the women are impacted through having connections with different agencies. Are they having more financial support, social support, emotional support? And I think it would be easy to survey them before they're arrested, during their time in the courts, and then after their arrest and their time in the courts. There could be surveyed and see how much time that they're, how many people they're being connected with, and if they're being properly helped, and if they're being properly connected. And also, is this worth the cost? So is there an actual decrease of sex trafficking happening in Columbus? Or maybe this, if it is worth the cost, it could be expanded and seen to be used in other court systems around the state of Ohio, not just in Columbus. Thank you for listening to this presentation. And if you guys are wanting to get involved, there's actually a lot of different practical ways to get involved. You can look up shehasaname.org and you'll see that they have different ways to be an advocate, etc. Thank you guys.